Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Chris Murphy, President and Global Lead of Ipsos's Market and Brand Strategy Team, and Cliff Young, President of Polling and Societal Trends, Ipsos US Public Affairs. Gentlemen, you have the floor.
All right. Thanks, Megan, and thanks so much, everybody, for spending part of your day with us. This is the latest installment in our Know the New America campaign. I think many of you are aware we have recently conducted a really insightful exploration into what it means to be considered American in the global brand marketplace. But before we get to some of those findings, we want to put those things in context. And who better to do that than Cliff Young? And so over to you, Cliff, to get us rolling on the American context.
Thank you so much, Chris. And it's great to be here, everyone. It's great to be here on a Wednesday afternoon. I'm talking to you from DC. And, you know, obviously we want to talk about brands, American brands around the world, the impact of America on American brands. But we believe at first it's important sort of a level set and to talk about America and to talk about sort of those forces that have shaped our world that brought Trump to the White House in 2024 and are specifically shaping the policies that ultimately have an effect on or potential effect on American brands around the world. And the one point I want to make here before we jump in to the details, is just to emphasize that the Trump administration, Trump himself, is aligning with a series of values that are very important, that explain in part the policy agenda as it relates to tariffs and other sorts of issues. And we want to sort of detail those in some more granular sort of reflection. First and foremost, what we know today, whether it's here in the United States or around the world, there's a lot of trepidation, a lot of angst. People are feeling worried. And the question is why? And it's because they feel convention, norms, the normal being challenged. Indeed, the Trump administration is, if nothing else about that, challenging convention, challenging what was done in the past. And there are very specific reasons for that. Next slide, please. And here we want to detail, as I said already, sort of those forces that brought Trump to the White House, that can explain in large part the tariff agenda today. And there are two specific trends that we believe here at Ipsos are crucial. The first is a widespread belief that the system is broken, that parties and politicians no longer care about the average person, that elites have rigged the system against the people, and that there is a need for a strong leader, even if he or she breaks the rules, a strong leader to take the country back. That sounds very familiar, right? That sounds a lot like the last few electoral campaigns, at least since 2016 here in the United States. And the point we want to raise here is that this is just not an American phenomenon, but it's a global phenomenon as well. But most importantly, Trump, or at least in part, Trump feels that his agenda is to fix America, America that in his eyes, in his base's eyes, is broken. That's trend one, widespread belief that the system is broken. And trend two, next slide, please. Sorry, stay here. The second trend is basically a widespread belief, especially among Republicans, that policies should favor those born in the United States, native-born, versus foreign-born. Indeed, I would make the argument, and we would make the argument at Ipsos, is that this is the most important value that predicts politics in the United States and globally. Ultimately, it goes to identity, and more specifically, who truly is an American and who is not. And here we point out, look at the gulf between Republicans and Democrats. Democrats are increasingly less nativist. Republicans are sort of flatlined a bit with some ups and downs, but at a high level. And like I said, this is the most important value in our minds that defines politics today. Next slide. So just as a sum, the next slide, just as a sum before we get into the specifics of tariffs, which ultimately goes to trade, and much of what we're seeing, much of the friction we're seeing around the world when it comes to American brands. But ultimately, you cannot understand tariffs on purely economic terms. Indeed, what we often say here at Ipsos, is that the tariff debate is not about tariffs. It's about an American reset, right? Again, remember, widespread belief that the system is broken. Trump is the vessel, the champion for many Americans, especially Republicans, to fix that broken system, to fix that broken America. And tariffs are in and of themselves a reset to that. Why? Why should Americans, this is what many Americans say, why should Americans carry the burden of the world on their shoulders? Next slide. This said, many Americans are worried about tariffs. They see tariffs as inflationary. It doesn't matter the category. It doesn't matter the sector. This is how they feel. By the way, this is how people around the world feel as well. So tariffs already are a bad word in part. And even if they're being used to reset the American agenda, at least according to Trump and the MAGA base, widespread fear. Next slide. And an inflationary fear. Lots of doubts about the near-term benefits of tariffs. Some partisan differences. Republicans are a little bit more positive towards tariffs. Democrats much less so. I wouldn't say even independents are in the middle. They're sort of near Democrats than not. The point being is tariffs are seen as inflationary on the one hand. They're seen as having a negative impact in the near term. So what's up? Well, there's nuance there. And that's one thing we often emphasize when we talk about knowing the new America, that not everything is 100% or zero, black or white, red or blue. What we see here is some interesting trends. When you tease out the issue of benefits, so the first question, tariffs on foreign goods will lead to more goods being manufactured in the U.S. What you ultimately see is a majority of Americans saying yes. The next one is about jobs, the same sort of thing. 55% of Americans saying yes. They're more split on long-term versus short-term benefits at 50%. Look at the resiliency right now that Trump has with the Republican base, super majority belief. But the point being is, while Americans are worried about tariffs, they do see the short-term negative impacts, and they do see tariffs as inflationary. They also can see the long-term benefits, and more importantly, all Americans believe that the system is broken. Next slide. And sort of to round out before we go on to look at brands, American brands in a global context, this is the eye of the storm. The tariff agenda is being pushed forward principally because Trump is attempting to, in his mind, in his administration's mind, to fix a broken America. Ultimately, the huge question is, how long can this agenda last? Nothing lasts indefinitely. Indeed, we have elections around the corner next year. If the Democrats take the House and the Senate, which isn't likely, but take the House and the Senate, you could have some sort of turnaround in terms of the agenda. That's probably not likely. What we're looking for here at Ipsos more specifically are Trump's approval ratings. Is he able to maintain them in the mid-40s? That's where he is today. If he is, he will be able to push forward his agenda. But ultimately, tariffs have an inflationary impact. If inflation's too high, that will tend to erode his governability, his approval ratings. Many chief economists don't think inflation will be that high. The point I want to make here is it's not so clear the longevity or the resiliency of this agenda, it looks like Trump is more likely to be able to push it forward into next year than not. But we really have to look and see and pay special attention to the impact of tariffs on Trump's approval ratings. And now over to you, Chris, to talk about how politics and public policy in the United States is affecting the rest of the world.
Yeah, and Cliff, before I transition to that, just want to recap some of your opening comments and make sure we're all hearing you properly. I think you're saying that there's a generally universal recognition amongst Americans that the system is broken. However, it seemed from the one slide you showed that the vast majority of Republicans believe that native-born Americans should be the ones fixing it, compared to about a third of Democrats who might agree with that sentiment. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's interesting that we're all kind of aligned on the problem, but misaligned on who should do the fixing. But Cliff, thanks so much for that. And of course, interrupt me as you wish as we go through this next segment. So thank you so much for setting the realistic foundation of kind of what it's like to be here right now, and how our own citizens here in the United States are responding to the tariff news. That was very interesting. Some of the short-term reactions, not exactly sunny, even on the Republican side of the street. So how are others seeing us when we take our act internationally? You know, how are people starting to perceive us? Cliff, this is one that I know you've been taking a look at for quite some time, in terms of the Trump effect on brand America. Can you just describe this one to our listeners, please?
Yeah, I mean, the points in, thanks a lot, Chris. The points in blue are just basically Democratic administrations, in red are Trump's administration. And we just wanted to show that, independent of the moment in time, Republicans fare worse than Democrats. By the way, that goes all the way back to Bush 2. It's kind of a holdover from the war in Iraq. So we're already starting out, independent of the issue of tariffs, with Trump stepping in and having less credibility at a global level than his predecessor Biden. But there's something more. There's something more intrinsic about just being a Republican, being Trump himself, independent of his policies, that have this effect. Lower starting point, more difficult place to be, obviously. Then you obviously layer in the issue of tariffs, which makes it more difficult.
Yeah, and we're going to introduce shortly, some of the international perspective on commercial brands. But as a lead up to that, if I could just call everyone's attention to the specific percentage dips that we see between 2016 and 17, and then again between 2024 and 25, that might provide a little bit of interpretive guidance for what's going to be shared with you in a little while as we start to think about the Trump effect, the tariff effect, and the international brand perception effect. So, Cliff, this one's really interesting. Can you take us through this?
Yeah, this is a slightly different question. The slide before, we're looking at favorability, and this one we're looking at making a positive influence or a positive impact on the world. And this is kind of pre-post Trump, pre-post tariff. I think this is capturing more the tariff. And what we're seeing is, pretty stable rank ordering of countries in October 2024 and April 2025, with only the United States taking a dip at 13 points. So again, I think it puts it into perspective. It's sort of like a pre-post, if we're going to be technical and nerdy here, but it gives a good idea about sort of the relative position of the United States, after the tariff regime was announced and was being pushed forward.
Hey, Cliff, just another data point for our listeners to bookmark. As we move forward into the brand piece, remember Canada is up there at the top right? As kind of universally seen as having a positive impact on the world, even so, more so than position number 3, where people are speaking of their own countries. So Canadians deeply respected, around the globe. So just keep that in mind for something coming up.
Should I just jump in?
No, it's okay. I think what we're doing here is isolating down on some of our major trade partners and specifically how they're feeling about America's impact on global affairs. So the slide we just showed you was sort of the cumulative international effect, right, from one time period to the next. Now, if you look at these red lines on the right, you're looking at some specific countries. And anything to add on this?
No, I just think that, from a business and economic perspective, I mean, some of our biggest trading partners are taking the biggest hit in terms of their credibility towards the U.S. And while that doesn't necessarily mean it will have a direct impact, it at least suggests that the environment in these countries is less than ideal. I mean, at the very least, you don't walk into a room being, as an American, being ultimately credible in a context like this.
All right. So as Megan mentioned at the beginning, and we've mentioned a couple of times already, we have recently completed a very simple, but I think quite insightful study understanding the effect of being perceived as an American brand. So for our researchers in the audience, we went out and did 8,000 globally distributed interviews. You can see the major markets in which we focused. But the survey that we administered was very simple. We started with an open-ended question and said, hey, the United States of America, what brands come to mind? And I will ask everyone at this stage, be thinking about people who live here in the United States. And what brand do you think they mention the most in that first position, that top of mind position? Because the answer might surprise you a little bit. But be thinking about what you expect as an answer there. Then we moved on and we exposed our respondents to a series of 10 very well-known American-based brands. We asked them how familiar they were with those brands. We asked them for their level of trust in each of them. And we asked if they were likely to use them or purchase them, depending on the sector. And then we ended with a very interesting question. For each of those 10 brands, we simply said, do you think of these brands as American, international, or local? And when we carved the data up by those 3 simple data points or banner points, we got some pretty interesting stuff. All right. So to the question of which brands are just naturally associated with the United States. If we look across the 10 countries, there is one brand that definitely rises to the top, and that is Apple, which performs towards the top in one of the first 3 positions pretty much everywhere. So it actually comes in the first position in China, Mexico, the UK, Canada, India, and Japan. Nike actually takes the crown in Brazil. Coke is top of mind in France and Germany. And in the US, keeping in mind, there are, I believe, depending on your estimate, somewhere between 25 and 27 million brands available for sale in some form or fashion in the United States. Ford, in an open-ended question, was the runaway winner on top of mind awareness when it comes to associations with the United States of America. So if you guess Ford, well done. But and obviously that brand has been doing very well here. And I think we're going to show you a data point now that might start to explain some of that. As I mentioned before, we carved up our data in 3 very distinct and insightful columns. You know, do you see a brand as American? Do you see a brand as international? Do you see a brand as local? And when we compare for all the brands that we tested, the scores on trust and purchase intent between brands that were perceived as American versus either global or local, you see the differences that I'm about to expose. Hopefully that's clear. So each data point I'm about to expose, we're comparing brands that are perceived as American versus perceived as international or global. So in the United States, if your brand is perceived as American, it's a very good thing. On average, it's a +6 on purchase impact. It's a +9 on trust impact, as opposed to being perceived as an international player or as a global player. Unfortunately, I'm going to keep talking. So when we start to move around the world, those numbers start to dive downwards. So in Latin America, the purchase interest question, if you are perceived as American, you're coming in 15 points lower. In Mexico on purchase interest, if you're perceived as American in Brazil, you're coming in 20 points lower. And of course, you can see the trust figures. If we move east to some of the Asian countries, again, very similar negatives. So again, being perceived as American versus being perceived as international or local. And when we move to Europe, we see some of our most intense patterns, especially in the UK, where purchase interest takes a major hit, as does trust. And these are not percentage differences, these are point differences. So these have not been exaggerated to go off a low base or anything like that. These are actual point differentials between being perceived as American or international or local, okay? And then I want to close with Canada, just north of the border, but a -22 and a -21. And if you think about something that Cliff shared with you earlier, this is the country that internationally is perceived arguably to be the best global citizen, right? The one that's making the most universally positive impact on the globe. And yet, look how they're perceiving US-based brands right now compared to others. In terms of the global average, you can see that the purchase impact is at a -22, the trust impact is at a -21. But then, as Cliff mentioned earlier, yes, the world is ablaze with tariff angst. And these are some data here on the left coming from our latest essentials study, which is actually managed out of Canada. But the statement that you're looking at here is, hey, when I'm shopping, I try to avoid American products. And you can see Canada, of all the countries surveyed, is actually coming in on the highest US avoidance figures all summer long. But then the natural question is, well, okay, this is all attitudinal data, right? So to what degree is this actually translating to behavioral inaction or kind of brand choice impact? So I think this is where we have to be really careful, especially in the research and insights community, and we'll come back to some measurement principles in a bit. But we are seeing, some brands that have taken some behavioral dips. The Tesla situation's well chronicled. Of course, it's not exclusive to just brand issues, but it's a player. We do know that some US-based whiskey brands have felt the pinch in Canada, especially as shoppers encounter signs like the one pictured here on the right. And even as successful as Levi's has been internationally, especially in its recent association with Beyonce, which we'll talk about in a sec, even Levi's is issuing a bit of pre-guidance that there could be trouble on the horizon given anti-American sentiment. That's a citation from an article in The Guardian from just a couple of weeks ago. However, there are many brands that have not felt any financial impact, at least to date, from this sort of American, anti-American brand perception. So let's talk a little bit then about how that translates to implications for brand leaders, for insights leaders. If we take a really high level view of this, I think if you are managing a US-based brand in non-US markets, then, we have to be realistic here. If you are perceived as primarily American, that could be potentially derailing or damaging. But before we go overreactionary on this thing, we've got to be able to go out and quantify what I think of as the say-do gap, or the difference between attitudinal preference, stated intentions, and actual behaviors. That's something that really needs to be understood at the brand level, at the market level. And there are so many nuances by sector and geography that have to be we have to be attentive to there. And then, of course, without abandoning our core brand positioning, we're not suggesting everybody go out and reposition their brands internationally. But you might be in a position where you need to restrike, maybe a new balance in your kind of global, local messaging, depending on your brand situation. If, on the other hand, you are a brand that is manufactured outside the US and you are doing battle with a US-based company, well, this is a potential opportunity. If you're in that boat, right? Because if your US-based competitor is perceived as American, that could be a window upon which to compete. And now that's a kind of a 20,000 foot level view of this. Now let's go down a little bit deeper. And I want to start this by thanking one of my teammates here in North America. Her name is Janelle James, and she is our head of cultural intelligence here in the United States. She's really helped us think through this thing, I think, in a much more nuanced way. So if you are anticipating that you might have a bit of a storm to manage internationally here, we want to point out some things that can be done to manage those kind of potential derailers, to quote my friend Philip Ryan. All right. So let's keep in mind that, anti-American sentiment might be at a bit of a high right now, and that can make things more challenging. But there are really positive and sort of universally applicable American values that can travel across cultures really, really well. I've heard Cliff talk about freedom and fairness before, as part of the New America campaign, as being universally embraced American values here. They're also pretty universally embraced beyond. The innovative spirit of America, the pragmatic spirit of America. And certainly America is still known as a melting pot, as a place of many diverse cultures. So if we're smart about this, we're not exporting the American brand as something superior, but as something that can potentially connect global audiences. One really cool example of this, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, the recent Beyonce collaboration with Levi's. That one still from the laundromat ad kind of tells the whole story. There's so many positive American values being communicated in that one shot, and I think it's paying off handsomely for the brand. But I suspect that will be a campaign that will be studied in the future for its positive effects. But an example of something that can be done that really plays to the diverse strengths of the United States. We can also do plenty of things to dial up our global citizenship or local partnership. We can collaborate locally with businesses and influencers and really try to become part of the local fabric, but in an authentic way, you genuinely showcasing our local activities. Brands can highlight their contribution both to global causes and local communities, and ultimately, if they play their cards right, come across as not just American. Some of the stuff that Coke is doing in Europe right now is a really neat example of this. Some of you might have seen the Made in Germany campaign. It's pretty recent. This is a particular, spot made by Ghana that's part of that campaign. But it's leveraging a lot of the work that they do with local bottlers there. And I think they've done a great job stressing their ties to local consumers, markets, and employees, and going so far as to say made in Germany. Another brand that's so interesting on some of these points is McDonald's, and I think we like to challenge our clients to think very expansively about their brand narratives in a locally authentic and resonant manner. And being sure to respectfully adapt our offer and messaging there too. Now, the Nikalo Tiki Burger has been around for a long time, but it is kind of a well-documented case study in local offer adaptation, right, in India. But McDonald's is still at it. So just this week, they announced a relationship with Danish Crown, which is a company headquartered in Denmark that's going to be basically their meat supplier for all their Nordic markets. So it's a way for them to showcase local players, in their European advertising. And when we do that well, when brands do a nice job of that, it can create a really nice sense of belonging through a shared brand experience that makes people feel seen, heard, locally valued within their own cultural context. And if you do it right, you stop being, quote, an American brand or an American export, but a brand that's very locally relevant. Now, I promised implications for measurement. So we talked about some things you might think about as a brand leader. Now let's talk about things to think about as a researcher, as an analyst. I think if we're realistic about this, for the foreseeable future, what Cliff described is likely to continue. It will be fluid, it will be impactful, and with all the context and all the emotions involved here, we're going to need steady insights along the way. So yes, there are tracking implications there. We do think understanding the degree to which the brands in your category are perceived as American or global or local is a highly relevant thing to keep an eye on. And by adding just one question to a tracker, it opens many analytic doors. But again, just to make sure we're not overreacting to some of the drama in the data that I shared with you earlier in terms of the trust and purchase impact differentials, I want to reiterate that it is our responsibility to calibrate the relationship between a stated intention or a perception and a subsequent behavior. They're not the same thing. And that's why you can have the coexisting truths of, trust, image, purchase intention, questions or data that are so much lower for brands that are perceived as American, and yet not feel the sales sting in the immediate impact. We've got to be able to go in and quantify that by category, by brand, by country. Then we can put our brand leaders in an intelligently informed position to decide what to do on a local level. And then lastly, Janelle reminded me of this as well. I had to fall back on quant methods, but this is definitely a place to really let our fall flag fly, right? So there's so much nuance here. emotion, so much context at play that I think a lot of our quantitative methods are going to fail to pick up some of that nuance. So let's do apply cultural intelligence as we get a deeper understanding of some of those numbers, of some of that calibration that I talked about. So I think for brand leaders, for the research and insights community, a lot of pretty profound challenges and implications to deal with here. I don't think the sky's falling. It might be a little cloudy out there, but there are definitely some tools we can use to quantify the situation and make sure that we're remedying things in the right way to avoid those potential derailers that we talked about. So with that, we'll open up Megan for any questions or comments that have come in along the way.
Yes, thank you. We do have some questions that have rolled in. Cliff, I'll direct this one to you. We've heard you mention freedom and fairness in recent appearances you've made. How can those play here?
Yeah, so obviously, when one finds himself in the middle of a difficult situation, we want to revert back to what's foundational, what's fundamental, in what we believe, right? And freedom and fairness are those sorts of values. What we found here at Ipsos, we've tracked this in the United States for a very long time, and we've done international work on it as well. Kind of asking the alternative question, not the question is what polarizes us, because we know that lots of stuff polarizes us. We showed some examples of nativism. That's a polarizing issue. But what are those things that bind us, but not bind us at sort of a superficial level, but at a very, very kind of foundational level? And what we found is that there are a series of universal values that all humans, Americans, Brazilians, Brits, South Africans, kind of hold as dear, two of which are freedom and fairness. Freedom, you can think of it as choice. Fairness is just fundamental fairness. Are you treating your consumers or clients with fairness? Are you giving them choice? And so when you're Chris already talked about different strategies of brand communication and engagement. An additional dimension would be, think about what's foundational for humans just in general, doesn't matter who they are, and reinforce that in your messaging. And so I'll give an example that's not exactly linked to the issue of Brand America and the problems with Brand America today, but thinking of inflation in the United States. And so companies obviously are worried about that, the impact of tariffs on inflation, on their consumers. And the fundamental question was, can I be seen as fair even though I might have to increase my prices? How do I do that? How do I engage my clients, my consumers in a way that they trust me looking forward? And so obviously it would be deployed in a different way when it comes to the issue of Brand America. But those sort of foundational values are things that all hold, and the ability to frame it to your advantage will at least give you an additional layer, an additional degree of, let's say, freedom for strategic movement.
Great, thank you. Next question, Cliff, I will ask that you take this one as well. How much of these brand metrics is about Trump versus tariffs?
Well, it's a little bit of both, right? Let's think about this a bit. Trump, we saw that historically Trump took a hit the first time he came to office, and the second time. We also know if we had a longer trend that Bush took a hit. And so, at least in this century, the world doesn't really like Republicans. The world likes Democrats more. Indeed, we've actually done this polling around the world at Ipsos, and besides a couple countries, most countries would have voted for Harris, not for Trump. And so you have that sort of in the, let's say that those are the atmospherics a bit. I don't really like Trump. I'm grumpy towards him. I would much rather have had, let's say, for the sake of argument, Harris. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that people take action. And so, you add the layer of tariffs on, and it activates people to sort of voice their already existing grievances as represented by low credibility scores. And so which came first, the chicken or egg, is difficult. Whether it's tariffs that did it or just Trump himself. But Trump is the one that's pushing the tariff agenda. But what we know is with low levels of credibility on the one hand and an issue in tariffs which is motivating people around the world, that's a complicated cauldron or mix for companies, American companies around the world. Indeed, I'll just say, just sort of like talking to people around the world, we talk to clients and stakeholders all the time. I just with a group of Canadians last week, and they actually, some of them were even worried of putting their picture on Instagram to say that they were in the United States. Or in the supermarket itself, they had flags on those things that were American. My wife is Brazilian, and just talking with the family, people don't want to travel here to the U.S. So the point being is, you didn't see that in 2017 or 18. They didn't really like Trump. They weren't Trump supporters, but they would come here. So that the two together just make it, let's say, more complicated. There's more friction globally than there otherwise would have been.
Great, thank you so much. Chris, I'm going to ask you this next question. What does it mean to quantify a say-do gap?
Okay, yeah, I was probably a little bit flip with that on the brand leader slide. Hopefully I came back and clarified it a bit on the measurement slide, but this is where we have to be real disciplined in our analytic planning and understand the calibration or the relationship between a stated intention or perception and a behavioral outcome, preferably at the respondent level. And I think what we're going to find, when we start to apply those analytics, is the answers are going to differ quite a lot by category, by geography, and that's okay. So I'm not going to offer like a blanket answer as to what the difference between perception and reality will be. We're going to see a lot of differences. I mean, think about just categories where we're in faster moving purchase cycles, more regular purchase cycles compared to those that might be more elongated or unpredictable, or categories where, frankly, it's just easier not to take action. So all those things matter when you're kind of playing these math games out. But no, it's a great question, and I do think there's a lot of work that needs to be done here in calibration. And if I could just add something to what Cliff said a moment ago on the Trump versus tariff issue contributing to some of the numbers I shared. I think what happened when we overlaid the tariff activity earlier this year is you took what was already a perceptual issue and you made it more commercially relevant. Because now it's potentially hitting people in the wallet. And I think that's why you're seeing some of the drama in the brand numbers.
Perfect, thank you. We have time for just one more question. Chris, I'll direct this one to you as well. You said that we could add one question to a tracker. What question would that be? And how can we do that without impacting trend lines?
Oh, that's a quick answer. Question number 6 from the survey flow that I showed earlier. Do you consider this brand to be American, international, or local? Very simple ad. And also something that can easily be parked in the back or in the midsection of an ongoing tracker so that it doesn't disrupt any trends. But just with that simple question, you've set yourself up with, I think, a very powerful banner design that will help you be attentive to this dynamic over time. So yeah, that's a simple one.
Great. Well, that is us at time. So I just really want to thank both of you for today's candid discussion. And thank you everyone for joining us today. If we did not get to your question, then we will do so by email. You will also receive an email with a direct link to today's recorded presentation. And of course, we welcome the opportunity to speak with you. So please feel free to reach out to us. That now concludes today's webinar. Have a wonderful day.